Hi, I'm Tracy Page. I am the Aquatic Education Coordinator for the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. And I know that sounds like a super long title, but what it really means is I teach about fish and aquatic systems, which are like lakes and rivers and the Great Lakes. And I teach about the animals and plants that are in them and the animals and plants that are around them because they're all interconnected. And my goal is to try to help you understand those different aquatic systems and hopefully like them and appreciate them and want to protect them. And then use them, right, to get out and go fishing and kayaking and go to the beach and use all of our natural resources. So I work for the Department of Natural Resources here in Michigan. There are about over 1,000 of us that work for the DNR. And what we do is we protect the natural resources of Michigan for you, right? We're trying to make sure we're keeping things in balance and making sure that the people of Michigan can use those resources wisely and keep everything healthy and happy. So by doing that, we can make those resources available to you because you own them, which you probably don't think about, right? The people of Michigan own our natural resources. So if you've been to state parks or maybe one of our fish hatcheries or have gone camping at a state park, all of those things belong to the people of Michigan, and we at the DNR just help take care of them for you. So what we're learning about today is the life stages of salmon. And the reason we're doing that is because a lot of us are in Salmon in the Classroom. So you can actually see behind me, I'm sitting in front of our virtual Salmon in the Classroom tank, and there's little tiny sac fries zipping around in there, and they are slowly developing. So they hatched about a week and a half ago, and they are slowly absorbing that little yolk sac that's attached to their belly, and then they're gonna seal up and start swimming around and eating food. So what we're gonna learn about is all those different stages of salmon. But the first thing we need to learn about is actually what the salmon are in our state and where did they come from and who are they related to. So let's learn about that. So the life stages of salmon starts with something other than salmon. So let's learn about the Salmonids in Michigan. So Salmonids is kind of the big family group for those in the salmon family, and it includes things other than just salmon. It includes trout species and other species. So you can see the one over here with the red fins and the little white edges. This is our state fish. Anybody know what that is? You can drop it in the chat. So our state fish, common in cold water streams up north, right? So the farther north you live in Michigan, the more common these fish are going to be. They like nice, cold, clean, fast-moving streams that have rocky bottoms, right? So we're seeing some things come in the chat. Let's look. Ooh, that's a good guess. Some other good guesses. This guy with his little squiggly speckle back is a brook trout. And again, that state fish of Michigan, and they're pretty darn cool. So they have those red fins with the white edges, and they actually even have those when they're pretty tiny, so they're pretty easy to identify. This other one you may not know of. So this is a cousin of trout and salmon that was once native to Michigan and has been extirpated. So extirpated means it was once here, and now it is extinct, but only here in Michigan. So it is extirpated from Michigan. It has exited Michigan, right? Easy way to remember it. But this fish is still found in other places in the country or on Earth, right? So this fish is not very big. They're only about a foot long, and they have this really pretty, colorful sail fin. And they were very popular to fish for in the late 1800s. And part of that caused their demise, right? A little bit of overfishing worked in there, but also at this time we were doing a lot of logging in Michigan. So we're cutting down large trees and we're using those rivers to float the logs to lumber mills or ships to carry them. And those logs bumped together and they gouged the bottom of the river. So they were creating sediment stirring up, so lots of that mud floating in the river. And they also gouged all the rocks off the bottom. So this particular fish like to lay their eggs in those rocks on the bottom, so they're getting gouged out of the way or they're getting buried in sediment, and that also helped to lead to their extirpation or them being extinct, but here in Michigan. So this fish is pretty cool, and we're actually trying to bring it back. There's some efforts to bring it back, and there's really cool videos on the DNR page about this fish, but this one is an Arctic grayling. So now you know two of the salmon cousins that were native to Michigan streams, and still are. But there was another salmonid in Michigan. So that one lives out in the Great Lakes, right? So this is a large fish, predator fish, that lives out in the Great Lakes in decently deep water. They like to be 100 feet, 200 feet deep. And this one, being fisheries biologists, some of us are pretty darn creative, but sometimes not so much. So when we named this one, we weren't terribly creative. It's a big trout that lives out in the lakes. What do you think we called it? Yeah, it's a lake trout. So these lake trout were our big native predator, salmonid, out in the Great Lakes for a long, long time. And then they were impacted by an invasive species. So we've got these big predator fish out in the lakes, and then an invasive species snuck in. So let's look at our lake trout. So here's our lake trout, right? Big fish. I can't even fit him on the screen, right? So our lake trout is that big predator fish. He's got that good predator mouth, right? We know he's in the salmon and trout family because he's got this funny little fin. This is called an adipose fin, and only trout and salmon species have this. So all of these salmonids have this adipose fin. They're nice big predators. And then in came a nasty invasive species. And you might have heard of these. So let's look. This guy, what do you think? Have you heard of those? They would come in and they would latch onto these fish and they would suck their body fluids, right? Not blood, they're not vampires, but they would suck their body fluids. And then they would eventually incapacitate the fish because they would leave wounds, and those wounds can get infected and that can kill the fish. So we lost a lot of our native lake trout due to this invasive species called sea lamprey. So the Arctic grayling are now extirpated from Michigan. Lake trout populations have gotten really low because of sea lamprey. So we have all sorts of issues with our little salmonids in Michigan. And this is part of where our hatcheries come in. So Michigan fish hatcheries are extremely important in maintaining fish populations and providing fish that you can use for sports fishing opportunities. So if you go fishing, a lot of the fish you're going to try to fish for in the Great Lakes are raised in our hatcheries. So let's look at one of the videos explaining that.
Michigan state fish hatcheries have been around for decades, hatching eggs and rearing juvenile fish so they can be stocked in public water bodies throughout the state. Why does the Department of Natural Resources do this? For a variety of reasons. 1. To restore ecosystem balance, especially for fisheries affected by invasive species. 2. To provide diverse fishing opportunities folks of all ages can enjoy. 3. To rehabilitate fish populations that are below desired levels. And 4. To reintroduce species that have gone absent from Michigan.
Michigan's fish production system helps anglers with increasing angling opportunity by put, grow, and take efforts. And what that means is, here at the hatcheries, we're growing fish to put out in the wild, hoping that they will then grow, and so that anglers can take them either with catch and release or to bring them home for table fare. The hatcheries produce millions of fish annually for distribution all across the state. The value there has been estimated at anywhere from $5 to $11 billion annually. We've got 6 diverse fish hatcheries located all across the state. Each one has staff dedicated to those efforts.
2 of Michigan state fish hatcheries are in the Upper Peninsula, and the other 4 are located below the bridge. Each location puts a lot of time and care into rearing their respective species. Let's break it down. Harrietta State Fish Hatchery is Michigan's oldest facility of this kind, having opened in 1901. It's located in the northwest Lower Peninsula and rears rainbow and brown trout and Atlantic salmon. Marquette State Fish Hatchery is where the DNR rears brook and lake trout, as well as splake, a hybrid cross between these 2 species. Odin State Fish Hatchery is located near Petoskey and is the place where brown and rainbow trout are reared. Platte River State Fish Hatchery is just southwest of Traverse City and is Michigan's main salmon hatchery. They rear Atlantic, Chinook, and coho salmon here. Thompson State Fish Hatchery, located in Manistee, is where the DNR rears Chinook salmon, steelhead, and walleye. Lastly, Wolf Lake State Fish Hatchery in Mattawan currently produces steelhead, Chinook salmon, walleye, and Great Lakes muskellunge.
Our hatcheries have a lot to offer for visitors. They can see fish at different stages of development. It's very informative. There's a lot of information in our visitor centers They could potentially come to a weir when we have adult salmon returning, or to other facilities that have show ponds where they can see adult fish.
Check out the DNR's fish rearing efforts up close and plan a visit to one or more of Michigan state fish hatcheries. Learn all about the steps we take to safely and effectively rear more than 20 million fish to stock in Michigan waters each year. For more information, visit michigan.gov/hatcheries.
Then what we need to do is start to think about where they need to go. And that's where our fisheries management comes in, right? So they have the hefty responsibility of understanding the populations in our Great Lakes. So we have research vessels that go out in the Great Lakes and monitor predator populations, so like our lake trout and our salmon. They also can keep track of our prey populations. We call them bait fish, right? So the small fish that they would be eating. So they need to understand those populations, right? And then they need to understand the full system. So the plankton, right? The plankton is feeding those bait fish and the bait fish are feeding those predators. And we need to understand the water quality and all those other pieces. So those are all pieces that go into rearing and stocking fish. So let's learn a little bit more about those species that we stock here in Michigan. So like I said in the video, we have quite a few species we stock. Lake trout are those big native ones that were out in the Great Lakes. Splake are a cross between brook trout and lake trout, so they're a hybrid. And this is a splake here in this picture. You can see they've kind of got a cool pattern, but they still have those red fins with the white edges like that brook trout does. They're a little bit smaller and they like to hang out the rivers more than lake trout do, so they're pretty fun to catch. Our Arctic grayling, and then we have some symbols after them that tell us a little bit more. So N would be native, I would be introduced, like we brought them here. So the Arctic grayling is native, but it's also extirpated, right? We also raise rainbow trout and then brown trout. And we do that using broodstock. So broodstock are where we keep adult fish in a hatchery, in a raceway or the big tank in the hatchery. And we spawn those adult and then they go right back into that big tank to be happy little fish, right? So those are called broodstock, where we keep the adults that are helping to make the babies. Some other fish we rear are steelhead, which is a lake-going rainbow trout. So they are rainbow trout that like to spend their time out in the Great Lakes rather than in a river. We also raise coho salmon and then our Chinook salmon for salmon in the classroom. And those ones are from wild fish at weirs, right? So we put like this kind of a fence across the river that stops the fish from migrating, and we can pull those adults and spawn them. And in the case of the steelhead, we actually put them right back in the river and off they swim. Coho and Chinook salmon actually die after they spawn. So we euthanize them nicely. We take the eggs and the milt, we fertilize those eggs, and then the adult fish that are euthanized are actually used for pet food and other resources. So another one we raise is Atlantic salmon. And Atlantic salmon are interesting because they are from the opposite ocean, right? Coho and Chinook salmon are from the Pacific Ocean, and they swim in the ocean as adults. They swim up those freshwater rivers to spawn and then die. Atlantic salmon are from the Atlantic Ocean, and they spawn and then swim right back away to live another year. So they're different than our Pacific salmon. We also raise walleye and muskie. And again, those are a little different because the young babies are raised in ponds and then stocked out. So they're raised in earthen ponds outside, so they get a little bit bigger and a little bit better chance in the wild. So those are raised from wild fish, right? So let's go back and talk about those Atlantic versus Pacific salmon. So here we have an Atlantic salmon, and then we've got our Chinook salmon over here, one of our Pacific salmon. So those species are quite different, like I said. So let's look at an Atlantic salmon. So they are, I mean, still a pretty big fish, but they're kind of torpedo shaped. They've got those speckles. They can be more silver or more earthy colored depending on where they're hanging out. They're pretty adaptable. And like I said, these guys spawn and then swim right back out to live another day. So a different reproductive strategy. And in hatcheries, these guys are pretty fussy. So they're not as easy to take care of as Chinook salmon or coho salmon. They don't like as much light or noise. So we have to be a little bit more careful when we raise these guys. And then our Pacific salmon, we've got coho, right? Which are, again, pretty big fish. They have a silvery color with kind of a bluish tint on their back with a few speckles, but not a ton. And these guys are a nice big predator fish out in the Great Lakes. They like to eat alewives, which are a bait fish about this big, but they also will go to the surface and eat stuff and go to the bottom and eat stuff. They're kind of adventurous. The other one that we raise in Salmon in the Classroom is a Chinook salmon, even larger. I definitely can't fit him on the screen. That big predator mouth, right? They have speckles across their whole back, their dorsal fin, and then all the way down their caudal fin, their tail fin there. Remember, the salmon and trout species have this adipose fin. So these Pacific salmon, like I said, they hang out in the lakes or in their native habitat out in the Pacific Ocean. And then when they're ready to spawn, they swim with those rivers, they spawn, and then they die. So a little bit of a different reproductive strategy. And they can lay like 4,000 to 5,000 eggs, a female can. So that's a lot of eggs, right? So we have those two types of salmon, but we have a little bit more to learn about them before we can go through the life stages. So I have a really good video for that. So let's pull that up. Since the 1960s, Chinook salmon have become an important piece of the puzzle that is the $7 billion per year Great Lakes fishery. But the story doesn't start here. Chinook salmon were introduced to the Great Lakes in the 1960s thanks to eggs from salmon in their home range of the Pacific Northwest. To supplement wild populations, the Michigan Department of Natural Resources maintains a salmon rearing program in our state fish hatcheries. In their native habitat, they are anadromous, migrating from rivers to the Pacific Ocean and back. In Michigan, Chinook salmon are petadromous, meaning they travel from rivers to a Great Lake and then return to their natal rivers as adults, where they then spawn and die. This marks the end of their life cycle. The DNR maintains weirs around the state, which are used to block the upstream migration of fish. The Little Manistee River Weir, located on the river that bears its name, is the main egg take location for Chinook salmon in the state of Michigan. The adult fish are diverted up a fish ladder and into holding ponds where they mature prior to spawning. Staff gather each October to spawn the Chinook. Fish are mechanically crowded into a building and humanely euthanized. Once euthanized, they are checked for ripeness, sorted by sex, and placed in a disinfectant bath of iodine to remove any external pathogens. Fisheries staff make every effort to only spawn wild fish. Those with missing adipose fins are hatchery-reared fish and will not be spawned. Females are then stripped of their eggs, while males are stripped of their milt, or sperm. The 4,000 to 5,000 eggs from one female are fertilized with milt from one male. The fish go through a disease inspection and are then placed in bins for human consumption and pet food. All parts of the fish are harvested and used. No portion is wasted. After the eggs have been fertilized, they are placed in a water bath containing thiamine for a period of 1 hour. Chinook salmon feed almost exclusively on alewife, which lowers the thiamine level in the salmon. Egg batches are then mixed into 5-gallon buckets where fresh, clean water provides oxygen. Eggs are disinfected one more time with an iodine solution and then transported back to a state fish hatchery. At the hatchery, green eggs are placed in incubation trays. Water is constantly circulated through every tray, each of which houses 7,500 eggs. Eggs hatch in approximately 45 days and begin living off their yolk sac. At this stage, they are called sac fry or alevin. Upon absorbing their yolk sac during their first month, called buttoning up, the Chinook are transferred to larger tanks as swim-up fry. In these tanks, they are provided all their needs of life, including food, water, and shelter. As the young Chinook salmon grow over the winter, their markings become more complex, and they become adept at feeding. At this stage, they are called parr. As the parr get bigger, they start to lose their camouflage markings and take on a more silvery appearance, which is called smolting. This is the stage where state fish hatcheries begin stocking the fish into rivers around Michigan. Fish are weighed and pumped into stocking trucks, driven to their assigned site, and then released into the water. Some are transferred into holding pens to be fed a little longer, and then they are released. These fish, now with a solid silvery appearance, are called smolts. They will imprint on their natal stream and forage for food. As they grow larger, they will make their way downstream to one of the Great Lakes, where they will live for the next couple years. While in the lake, they consume alewives and other fish swimming in the middle of the water column. They can gain up to 30 pounds in those few years while reaching maturity. Once mature, they will make their way back to their natal stream in the late summer and early fall. This is a great time for anglers to focus on catching a Chinook salmon, either from a boat in the lake or in the stream as they migrate to spawning locations. Once in their natal stream, Chinook salmon migrate until they find the perfect spawning habitat. Females then make a redd, or a nest, in the gravel. After spawning, they will die and become part of the river's nutrient cycle, with their young starting the whole process over again. For more information, visit michigan.gov/SIC. They are so interesting that, they have this unique life cycle that takes place in the Pacific Ocean, and then we move them here to Michigan, and they have to adapt to being in only freshwater. They don't ever go back out to saltwater again. So it's kind of a pretty cool thing. So these Chinook salmon start out as eggs in the river, and that is through that's spawning, right? So that's what we call when the female fish lays eggs and the male fertilizes them with milk, and they are then fertilized eggs. So that takes place in the river. So like the video said, that male and female, they're migrating up a river from the Great Lake. They're finding the perfect spot, that nice gravel bottom, and the female digs a redd, and then she lays her eggs, and the male zips in to fertilize them. So these are what the eggs would look like at the bottom of the river. The white ones are actually unfertilized. So those would be dead eggs. They're just gonna end up being food for other fish or for crayfish. The ones that have turned orange, however, are fertilized eggs. So these ones are fertilized eggs, and they're starting to develop. So in that first day, they're actually pretty sturdy, and that's the day we take them back to hatcheries from the weir. But in the wild, they just nestle down into the rocks, and then they stay there. And they stay there for about 45 days. And that's when they begin to hatch. So we've got those eggs starting to hatch as they are exiting what's called the eyed egg phase. So eyed eggs are those nice round eggs where the fish is developed inside, and you can actually see the little eyeball of the fry. So inside those eggs, you can see the eyes. We call them eyed eggs, and then they start to pop, right? They start to hatch. And then you see the little guys coming out, and they don't all hatch at the same time, right? So environmental conditions, temperature in the river, maybe they were fertilized by a couple different males. They're all going to hatch at different times. And they do the same thing in our salmon in the classroom tank. So then once they hatch, they are called sac fry. So here's a picture of kind of how that hatching process works. If you visit our Salmon in the Classroom YouTube playlist on the Michigan DNR channel, you can watch a video of a hatching fry under the microscope and see how it really works. It took about 20 minutes, and I condensed it into about a minute under the microscope there. So you can watch them, their little eggshell cracks, out pops the tail, right, that had been curled up in there, and then the eggshell pops off, and then you can see their big yolk sac hooked to their belly. They're actually attached to that yolk sac, and they live off of it for about a month. They don't need to eat food at this time. And really, they don't do much. They lay down in the gravel and hide. And every once in a while, they'll get ambitious and they zip around like little bumper cars, but they don't eat at this phase, and they don't really swim around. They just kind of nestle down in the rocks and try to stay safe, right? Because they don't want to be eaten by predators. So our next phase is called button-up fry. So after they absorb that yolk sac for about a month, they're going to zip their little bellies up, and off they swim, but they don't go far. So they're going to hang out down by those rocks so that they can hide. They were starting to get really good camouflage marks, but they're still not very adventurous. They can't swim really fast, especially in river currents. So they're going to hang out down by those rocks and stay safe, right? But they're going to start eating, and they're starting to get more adventurous. And then they become par. So these are a little bit bigger. They can be a couple inches, 3 inches long. And they've got par marks, which are these stripy colorings on their side. And now they've got good camouflage to go out exploring in the river and try to find food. So this is where they learn to really become good hunters, right? And at this phase, they're not hunting other fish. They're hunting tiny bugs that live in the stream and plankton. But they're learning how to target food and strike. So hit that food and get it. And they're swimming around and getting stronger and stronger in the river. Their next phase, as they get to be about 4 or 5 inches long sometimes, they're going to start to smolt, is what it's called. They get a more silvery appearance, and a little switch in their brain goes off and they start to go, I need to go out to a big lake, right? So they start swimming down the rivers and their coloring gets better for the Great Lakes, right? They don't need all that camouflage markings for the lake like they did in the river. Out in the lake, if there's a predator below them and they look up, they see a nice shiny silvery belly, which looks very much like the white sky, right? And if a predator looks from below or from above, they see the fish below them with little speckles and they kind of blend in with the bottom. So they're getting much better camouflage for being out in the Great Lakes. So after about a year, sometimes we have what's called a precocious spawner. So this would be a 1-year-old fish that really just wants to lay eggs and die, right? Or fertilize eggs and die. So we call them Jacks and Jills, and they come back a little early, right? So a year is not very long to live. But they come back and they want to fertilize some eggs or lay some eggs and then be done. Other ones come back at 3 to 5 years old. So these are mature salmon that have spent those 3 years out in the Great Lakes, eating tons and tons of those alewives, that bait fish that we saw in the video, and they get pretty big. So they can get up to 30-some pounds in the Great Lakes, and that's a pretty darn big fish. In the Pacific Ocean, where they're from, they can get up to like 100 pounds, so much bigger, but there's a lot more variety of things to eat out in the ocean, of course. So these 3-year-old to 5-year-old salmon decide they're ready to spawn, and they swim back up those rivers to spawn and then die, right? So here's a picture of those Alaska salmon. So again, a lot bigger. That last one was like a record holder in Michigan waters. And this one is quite a big one in Alaska. So much bigger. It's almost as big as this man. And a lot bigger fish coming back, but still about the same age, which is pretty crazy that they can get that big in like 3 years. So what we do as fisheries managers is what I call riding the wave, right? So to take in that full system, I said we need to do research, right? We have research vessels out there understanding predator populations and prey populations and plankton and trying to fit all those pieces together, right? And that's like a big math equation. So our researchers collect all that data on the vessels in the summer, and they spend all winter crunching data and looking under microscopes to try to figure out the big picture, right? Because we need to understand what the prey looks like, right? Because they're the bottom of our food pyramid, that plankton. And then we can look at the prey fish, those bait fish, and then we can look about how many predator fish we have. That helps us determine how many predator fish we can put in the lakes, right? How much food is there to support our Chinook salmon or our steelhead or our coho? So they do these great equations that put all those pieces together and try to understand the ecosystem. And I call it riding the wave, right? Because that stuff changes all the time. So maybe it was a rough year for eggs, like it snowed really early or there was ice in the river. And, so we didn't have as many babies. Or maybe it was a really good year for plankton, right? The zebra mussels and quagga mussels didn't eat all the plankton up, and the plankton boomed, and so did the alewives because they had lots of food. So our fishery biologists are constantly riding that wave, right? Trying to figure out what to do and how best to keep the system happy and right in harmony. So part of this, again, comes back to invasive species. So we've got invasive species that are wreaking havoc in the Great Lakes. This picture, you're not supposed to see what these are because this is like a 6-foot poster, right? But every single one of these little pictures is another invasive species in the Great Lakes. There are lots of them. And it's not just fish species like the sea lamprey, which are very prehistoric fish, but there are other fish species. There are crayfish. There are plants and plankton, zooplankton, like spiny water fleas that are wreaking havoc. So there's all these different invasive species that we need to keep tabs on. There are also other facets to think about, right? So the food web in our Great Lakes is very complex and it's constantly changing. So if you look at our top predators here, lake trout were native, right? But Chinook salmon were, coho weren't. The smallmouth were here, brown trout are introduced, rainbow trout are introduced. So the system is very different than it was historically. And then you've got invasive species like that spiny water flea. And you have our good plankton and zooplankton and phytoplankton. So there's a lot of different things changing. And one big thing that changed the system was zebra mussels and quagga mussels because they filter so much plankton, they actually make the water really clear. So we have to understand all these complex problems to try to figure out how best to manage our Chinook salmon and our other species that we rear in hatcheries. It's a pretty crazy thing to keep track of. And this could be you someday, right? So you could be the one that is taking care of our salmon in the future. You could work in one of those hatcheries, or you could be, looking at the big picture of the Great Lakes, right? So now we have time for some questions. So I'm going to look in the Q&A and we'll see what you guys have in there. So if you have other questions, definitely put those in there and I can pull them up. So let's see, what do you have in the Q&A for me? What percentage of salmon eggs die before becoming a small fry? So it kind of changes, right? It depends on those environmental conditions. So the water needs to be nice and cold. They don't like warm water. So the water in our tank here is 52 degrees, which is a pretty comfortable temperature for them in the fall. They would survive, obviously, winter, so they can get even colder, but they develop slower, right? Survival rates have to do with fertilization, but they also have to do with genetics, right? So maybe there's some genetic issues. There's a reproductive strategy with salmon, right? They're putting 4,000 to 5,000 eggs in the river from that one female in the hopes that maybe one of those babies survive to be an adult to come back to spawn, right? And produce their own 4,000 eggs. So they don't spend a lot of effort, right? Their body doesn't spend a lot of effort making sure that every single one of those 5,000 eggs is genetically perfect, right? They just produce a lot of them in the hopes that one will survive. The flip side of that would be like giant pandas or even humans, right? We invest a ton of effort into growing babies, right? Inside of us rather than like laying eggs. And then we take really good care of those babies for a really long time, just like giant pandas do, to ensure the survival of that one baby, right? So it's just two different ways to look at it. Am I going to invest a lot of time and effort in growing and raising that baby? Or am I going to put a bajillion babies into the wild and hope one of them survives on their own, right? So just kind of a totally different strategy. Why do the walleye have to be in ponds first? They don't have to be, but when we're putting them in ponds, they're little tiny, tiny buggers. It also allows our partners to be part of this. So a lot of those walleye go out to partner groups that raise them and stock them in certain places. So it's kind of a fun collaboration that they get to take part in. Another question, why did I decide to take care of salmon? So my degree, I have 2 degrees in marine biology and oceanography, right? So marine biology is the animals that live in the ocean. Oceanography is like the waves and the sediment and the chemicals and all of that kind of stuff. And I loved that stuff, but I kind of strayed more into teaching, and that's what my master's degree was in. And I just love this stuff. And salmon's a perfect fit for me, right? I'm from Michigan, but I know a lot about saltwater fish, which a salmon is, right? So a perfect fit. And it's fun to be part of taking care of them and raising them in a tank. And I'm getting to do lots of really cool videos. So be sure to check on the Michigan DNR YouTube channel and find the Salmon in the Classroom playlist. I'm updating about 4 to 5 videos each week. And like I said, doing cool stuff with the microscope and close-ups and all sorts of neat things. Why do Alaskan salmon get way bigger than here? It's food, right? And places to grow. They can stretch out, right? They have lots of ocean to swim in. And some of these fish migrate hundreds and hundreds of miles. So they're out there and they have a little bit more variety in what they eat. So here in Michigan, especially Chinook salmon, they eat mostly just alewives. They will eat some other bait fish, but they kind of swim in the middle of the water column. So just not at the top, not at the bottom, but right in the middle. And they eat the fish that are in front of their face. They're not very ambitious. They're not going to go up. They're not going to go down. They're going to eat the ones in front of their face. And guess what fish is commonly in front of their face? Alewives, because that's where they like to hang out too. Out in the ocean, they're going to eat bait fish like that. Maybe, you know, like herring, if you've ever heard of herring cousins and other fish like alewives, but they also could eat squid and, you know, other things that are swimming in the middle of the water column. And then they have a lot more room to grow, right? And the nutrients are a little different too. So fish, salmon taken from the Pacific Ocean are going to have more pink flesh when you eat them, like you buy a slab of salmon. It's going to be very pink because of basically a vitamin in the prey that they're consuming, right? So the plankton out there has this like orangey vitamin in it, and that translates into the salmon skin. Here in Michigan, we don't have that same vitamin in our plankton. So they don't really get quite as orangey pink here, but it's the same fish, right? And it tastes very similar, just a little bit different color. And then let's see, how many people work with me? So I work for the DNR's Education Services. So I work with a bunch of other educators. So we have 10 visitor centers around the state that you guys can go visit on normal years, right? Where they're nature centers. So you go in and you see exhibits and live animals, and you can do programs. Over the winter, they tend to do like lantern lit hikes and snowshoe hikes and all sorts of cool stuff. In the summer, you can learn to fish. You can learn to shoot a bow and do some archery. You can do all sorts of fun things. So I have those colleagues around the state, and then there's a couple of us that work more in offices and with teachers and classrooms and do that kind of thing. But there's well over 1,000 people in the DNR, and we all do different jobs. So my best friend works for our parks division. And she takes care of invasive plants in the parks, right? So she goes into the forest with saws and poison and a bunch of volunteers, and they get rid of all those invasive shrubs, and they get them out of there before they ruin the forest and the parks around the state. So that's a really cool job that I don't understand, right? Because I know about fish and she knows about forests. So that's a great fit for her. There are biologists that take care of our wildlife. They understand deer populations or wolves or moose or elk, right? We have foresters that take care of the forests all over the state and understand those. We even have like pilots that fly planes so that you can keep track of like wolf populations. We have people that fly drones. And we also have all the other normal jobs, right? So we have accountants that take care of the money, and we have graphics designers that make stuff pretty. And we have a social media guy that does Instagram and Twitter, things like that. So there's a lot of variety of jobs in the DNR, but we're doing it all for you, right? We're helping to protect and promote those natural resources so that you can get out there and use them, which is pretty cool. Oh, the chemical test. So that'll be our last question. So someone asked about the water testing the tank, and I'm actually going to shoot another video today doing water testing in a little bit of a different way. So we have that test kit with all those different tubes, and you have to do 8 drops of this and 10 drops of that and shake it or do different things. It's not terribly hard to do, but it takes some practice. So it comes with instructions, and then you fill that little tube with 5 milliliters of water, which there's a little line that tells me how much to put in there. And then I followed the directions for that bottle. And sometimes I have to shake it for a really long time first. Sometimes I have to do one bottle, then another bottle. So it's really just being careful and following directions. To do it safely, you're gonna wanna wear safety goggles so you don't get any of the testing chemicals in your eyes. And you're gonna pull water out of the tank in like a beaker and then use that to get your test tubes. You don't wanna be putting dirty test tubes in your tank. You might hurt your fish that way. But those water tests tell us a lot about what's going on in the tank. And if your teacher has a problem with the fish in their tank, the first thing I'm going to ask them for is a picture of their tank and their equipment so I can see what it looks like. And then what is their water quality data sheet? Because those numbers over time tell me a lot about the health of that tank. And I can see trends and hopefully find solutions to help your teacher diagnose problems and fix anything that might be going wrong in the tank. So I want to thank you guys for being here. This is awesome to have so many people join us. This recording will be going up on our YouTube channel as well. And you can find all those other great videos on the Michigan DNR YouTube channel and find the SIC playlist. I wanted to share a few other resources we have available to you. For teachers, you can visit michigan.gov/nature@school, and you can find a whole host of topics that you can book as live virtual programs, like a virtual field trip right in your classroom or right through your computer. We have about 11 topics right now with more coming soon. Or families or homeschool groups can go to Nature at School and book a webinar format. So we offer our topics as webinars where as many people as possible can join. Not quite as interactive because we don't see our students, but those webinars are super educational and very much like this History of Salmon presentation was. Another resource we have available is called Nature at Home. Again, michigan.gov/nature@home. And this is filled with zillions of resources. So class activities, home activities, where you can get out in nature and do some cool stuff. Different video playlists to help you connect with all sorts of pieces of nature. So a great way to get your family outside and enjoying nature throughout all of our seasons here in Michigan. Our other resource is our My Nature DNR Facebook page. This is kind of the warm and fuzzy side of the DNR. So each day of the week, we share cool, fun content that has wildlife in it. It has different opportunities, places to visit, all sorts of stuff. So definitely find My Nature DNR on Facebook and like that. Again, thank you so much for being here, and I hope that you take advantage of some of our other webinar opportunities.